So yes, Crimson Desert is actually getting a lock-on camera, probably the most requested feature from the previous Gamescom hands-on events, but thanks to an IGN video, we finally get to see that in full force. Also, it shows some awesome new abilities, some bow gameplay, and an extensive look at a completely new boss fight. Still no release date unfortunately, but with Game Awards not too far off, we might get more gameplay reveals and a possible release window really soon. So let's jump right in with all the info. So let's get started with the camera lock-on. This was a highly requested feature following some of the hands-on sessions, and basically you can just lock on any target now and you're going to see the small circle appearing over the middle of their body, and this is going to help a ton, especially in one versus multiple enemy situations, as now you can directly hit and lock on whichever target amongst them you want. Previously, a lot of folks complained about the fact that on its own, the camera did a very poor job at directing your character and your physical attacks towards the targets that you really wanted to hit. But lock-on is very natural, just feels something that should be implemented in a game like this, and I'm glad that the developers have listened to the feedback. Another thing about this is that it also seems we can lock on some other environmental props, like some of these hanging lanterns from the trees for some reason can also be locked on, but we don't really know why that is the case. Maybe it serves a purpose for the fight. Also, having that lock-on feature may or may not help with the bow and arrow gameplay. Maybe there's going to be a hip fire mode that just lets us shoot without having to manually aim. But on that note, I also want to cover the new gameplay and some of the other mechanics related to it, specifically to the bow and arrow. Because there's this cool ability over here that Cliff uses, which is kind of like an eagle vision. It slows down time, it reveals all of the enemies with a red outline, and if you use a bow and arrow, you can quickly mark them very fast so that you can unleash a barrage of arrows with whichever types of arrows you currently have selected. In this case, it was a freezing arrow, so pretty much all the enemies get frozen in place for a solid few seconds, up until you can pretty much go ahead and shatter them immediately. It doesn't seem to work on the boss, or at the very least one of the enemies blocked one of the arrows which were intended for the boss itself, so hopefully there's going to be some freezing effects on them too. But you can easily swap between these arrow types right away from the menu wheel, and from this point on, we've also seen the explosive arrows yet again in action. There have been some other gameplay videos of this in the past, but you can also pull off that slow time effect from the air. So we're going to talk about the ability that launches you in the air in just a little bit, but it looks really cool. Kind of reminds me a bit of Assassin's Creed. You just go in, mark the targets, and in this case, immediately shoot out a bunch of arrows that make all the enemies marked to explode. Now on this very screen, we have a bunch of other information, including Cliff's stats like health, spirit, the white crow, the stamina, and we're going to check those in just a little bit as well. But on the menu wheel, we can see some of the selectable items. So we have the sword and the shield, and then at the bottom we have the arrows as well as the bow, and then there's also a lamp and a consumable on each side of them. But there are 4 more slots that don't seem to have anything in them just yet. Only one right next to the sword on the left side that kind of appears to be some kind of, I don't know, two-handed mace or a weapon that seems to be rather big. I'm not sure if it's a weapon, but it definitely seems to appear as such. The compression over here really ruins it, so I do wonder if Cliff will indeed get other types of weapons to use, especially since we know we can pick off weapons from the ground from the enemies we have defeated. And at the same time, we know from the 2020 footage that there are other companions in the game that we can recruit, and in some of that footage it was shown that they are fully controllable, so some of them may use different types of weapons, giving me the impression that maybe there's more to just Cliff gameplay in Crimson Desert. Be that as it may, let's talk about some of the other mechanics. Like I said, there's another cool ability over here which just gives you a lot of aerial attack potential. So with this, you can either use environmental props like even walls or trees, but even from point blank, you can launch yourself in the air, double time, and then follow up with a bunch of other attacks. Now, some of these attacks can be your crow abilities. One of them is this slam into the ground that deals a very high AoE damage that immediately takes down all of these adds. However, you can also use the same attack to kind of give you some airtime and launch off a bunch of arrows, for example, like we've seen the explosive ones just now. Now, for all of these actions and a few more actions we're going to check in just a little bit, all of these consume what's likely the spirit. So this green lotus bar right here, right above our HP bar, gets consumed when any of these abilities get used. And you can see they are getting used by the green particle effects that come out. So whenever you see green particle effects, it means that you've used an ability that consumes spirit. Yeah, the only thing over here is that it seems that we are at 86 out of 90 spirit, even though, yeah, it doesn't really make sense how the bar calculates that. So there are two sections over here that should be 2% of extra spirit each. However, if you count every single section, it only gives you 20%. I'm not sure exactly how that gets calculated, but I guess we're gonna see it in the full game. But like I said, it's not just the jump effect, it's not just the slowdown time that consumes that spirit. We also have special sword moves that consume further spirit. So in this case, it's good to distinguish between the attacks that get powered by stamina and the ones that get powered by spirit, because they also appear with those different colored particle effects. So in the case of the yellow ones, obviously they consume stamina. Your stamina bar is right here to the side of the character in the form of that rhomb. It has a white outline and also an interior which is colored with a yellow mustard color. So the more you sprint, the more you block, the more you, for example, use heavy attacks, the more of that you're going to consume, to the point that you may be left with no stamina and you may need to retreat, or maybe just pace yourself so that you don't consume it as fast. So all of these actions will consume that stamina and your attacks will appear with those yellow particle effects. However, it seems that we don't just get to use stamina to power up our attacks. It seems that spirit is also one that we can use. And just like in the case of stamina, this is going to get consumed. Will also alter your attacks with the green particle effects instead. And it may be something that's maybe more useful against certain types of enemies. We don't really know just yet. From the looks of it, to me, it appears that both the stamina and the spirit powered melee attacks deal about the same damage to the enemy boss and the enemy as it spawns. Also good to note is that there are various quick time events that may appear during boss fights, both at the beginning and during the boss fight, such as dodging out of the way or escaping from being held by the boss. But I will say this about the combat, or should I say maybe the particle effects. I think that there's way too many of them. There's an overabundance of particle effects for pretty much everything. I mean, even the boss itself summons so many of them, it's kinda just very distracting. Plus, on top of the fact that your own attacks already generate a ton of them. I know that this is also the case in Black Desert, and it doesn't seem to be that big of a deal in that game, but somehow in Crimson Desert it looks a bit out of place. So I hope that there's going to be a way for us to tone that down and just focus on what's important, which is the combat. All in all, so far really impressed with the gameplay. The more I see of it, the more I want to play it. Still no release date, unfortunately, and still no announcement if it's even coming out in 2025. But one more thing I want to cover on a final note is that at the end of the boss fight, we can see one of those portals/doors appearing once again. So we did have some glimpse of this in 2023, I believe. There's a Gamescom presentation video in which we can see Cliff actually going into one of these zones and supposedly unlocking some kind of ability. We do know that this is primarily an action-adventure game, so that's likely how we may unlock new abilities or maybe new mechanics. We don't really know the full extent of that, but we may have a similar situation to that of Black Myth Wukong, for example, that similarly also gave us a ton of abilities from going out and defeating bosses. Anyway, that's pretty much it with the video for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.